A new county magistrate arrived in Pingnan City, none other than my ex-husband who had abandoned me. I immediately packed my belongings, ready to flee. But fate had other plans. My son accidentally broke the prized possession of Linling Pavilion, and all our savings were spent compensating for it. Worse still, my ex-husband became my creditor. When I arrived at Linling Pavilion, Li Jin was crouching in front of Meng Jusi, trying to amuse him. At the sound of my footsteps, both of them turned their heads. Two faces, so strikingly similar, stared straight at me, sending a chill down my spine. I stepped forward, grabbed Meng Jusi's hand, and turned to leave. "Miss Meng," Li Jin's servant called out. I looked back, puzzled. The young master accidentally broke the pavilion's jade pipa earlier. It's worth 1,000 taels. My master paid for it up front. 1,000 taels. It had taken me years of hard work at Yunshan workshop to save up 150 taels, enough to start over somewhere far away from Li Jin. Now, that dream was gone. I handed over my money pouch. Li Jin stood tall and aloof, his posture as straight as a pine. He said nothing, not even sparing me a glance. Instead, his gaze was fixed on Meng Jusi, who was peeking from behind me, his eyes deep and unreadable. I stepped forward to block his view and raised my hand, which was starting to ache from holding up the pouch. "Sir?" Li Jin finally took the pouch, pinching its corner without opening it, and slipped it into his robe. "If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave," I said. It was the first word he uttered. I fled the shop, my heart in turmoil, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Meng Jusi grasped my hand tightly and looked up at me with concern. "Are you unwell, mother? Are you sick?" "I'm fine." I tightened my grip on his small hand and explained. It rained earlier, and I was in such a rush to leave that I forgot to bring an extra layer. "I'm just a little cold." "Your clothes are wet from the rain too. Let's go home quickly." But Meng Jusi didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, his face full of guilt and self-reproach. "It's my fault. If I hadn't been playing around, I wouldn't have broken the pipa." He was nearly 7, an age meant for carefree play and mischief. Yet, he had become so mature, always wanting to ease my burdens. I could already picture his face at the moment of the accident, frozen with guilt and helplessness. A sharp pang of sorrow welled up in my heart. "How can I blame you? It's my fault for not picking you up sooner. You were just hiding in the shop from the rain and accidentally bumped into something. If we must blame someone, it should be the heavens." The seasons had cycled many times. Just when I was starting to forget those days and that man, fate cruelly placed them before me once more. My parents and Li Jin's parents met while fleeing famine. Otherwise, a farmer's daughter like me could never have become the wife of a scholar's son. From as far back as I can remember, everyone called me Li Jin's little wife. Every elder in the village who saw me would tease, "Xiaoyu, when will your parents tear down the wall separating your house from the Li families?" I didn't understand the meaning behind their words, but Li Jin did. He wouldn't let me talk to the old ladies and would drag me home. Their words gave me an idea. That night, after my parents had gone to bed, I grabbed a small hoe and began digging at the wall. When I was caught, I couldn't escape a scolding. Li Jin brought me chestnut cakes his mother had made and asked, "What were you digging at the wall for in the middle of the night?" Munching on a cake and sobbing, I replied, "If the wall is gone, I can always come to play with you and even sleep in your room." Li Jin's ears turned bright red. "We can't sleep in the same room." I pestered him about why we couldn't sleep in the same room for years, but he never answered. It wasn't until I grew older that I understood. Looking back on the silly things I'd done as a child, I felt too embarrassed to face him. By then, Li Jin was studying at Donglin Academy, far from home. He'd only come back every few months for a short stay. The longing was unbearable. I wanted to be with him all the time, even follow him to the academy. The year Li Jin passed the imperial exam and became a recommended scholar, I married him. Childhood sweethearts, young lovers, especially after the untimely deaths of our parents. We only had each other. I thought we would spend our lives together. The day before it happened, he stood before our parents' graves and swore to the heavens, "For the rest of my life, I will love only her." But the next day, he handed me a divorce letter. At first, I thought he was joking and brushed his hand aside, nestling into his embrace as usual. He sidestepped, his face filled with irritation and disgust, real and undeniable. The look pierced my heart, shattering it completely. I accepted the letter, not daring to ask why. What difference did it make?
He was tired of me.
I'd heard enough rumors about him and the minister's daughter. On the way back to Shirchiao village, I discovered I was pregnant. A pregnant woman, abandoned by her husband. It was too shameful. People would mock me. So, I turned the carriage around and settled in Tonghe village, where no one knew me. There, I secretly gave birth to Mengjusi. Back home, after changing out of his wet clothes, Mengjusi busied himself packing the unfinished luggage with his tiny hands and feet. The sight melted my heart. I quickly pulled him aside. "Go do your homework. Be careful. If your teacher quizzes you tomorrow and you can't answer, you'll get your palms slapped." "Aren't we moving?" His eyes sparkled with hope. I pulled him into a hug. "We're staying." He never said it aloud, but I knew how much he loved this place and his friends here. Li Jin had been the one to abandon me. I did nothing wrong. I wasn't the one who needed to run. The shopkeeper at Yunshan Fong was a woman. When I showed up after quitting yesterday and came back today to ask for work again, she didn't say much or ask any questions. She just assigned me the same tasks as before. I picked up the embroidery needle and cursed myself for not having the 3 heads and 6 arms of Neza. I had no idea how long it would take to gather the 850 taels I owed Li Jin, and I certainly didn't want to be in his debt. As the sun set, Aunt Chin from next door came to find me, looking flustered. "Jussie's in trouble," she said. Today, the teacher at the school had something urgent to attend to, so Mengjusi had left early, ahead of the usual time. Some of the children in the village saw him alone and invited him to play. At first, everything was fine, but later, for some reason, he got into a fight with one of the children. It escalated severely and even attracted the attention of the clan head of the Lin family. Before I could even step inside, I saw Mengjusi kneeling alone in the hall, his back straight as an arrow, but his small frame made my heart ache. They accused Mengjusi of stealing the family heirloom silver bracelet from the Lin family and were threatening to use clan law to cut off his right hand, demanding 50 taels of silver as compensation. I squatted in front of him and quietly asked, "Did you really steal their bracelet?" "I didn't," Mengjusi replied firmly. Hearing this, I helped him to his feet, brushed the dust off his knees, and fixed his disheveled clothes. When my eyes landed on the scratches on his neck, my heart tightened. I knew better than anyone what kind of person Jussi was. He never lied. If he said he hadn't done something, then he hadn't. The Lin family lived in Tonghe village. To them, I was an outsider, only allowed to live at the village's edge because of their kindness. My act of helping Jussi stand up was no different from challenging the authority of their clan head. Sure enough, the Lin family's wife stood with her hands on her hips, angrily cursing. A dirty, shameless girl like her can't possibly raise a decent child. Now she's stealing things and won't even admit it. Who knows, next she might even kill someone. We should have never let her stay. Mengjusi was furious. His tiny fist clenched tightly in my hand, his eyes were red, and he wanted to rush at her, but I held him back. "How are you so sure Jussi stole the bracelet?" I asked. The Lin family's wife rolled her eyes. "My son, Kwa, saw him sneak into the house and steal it. I never went into their house." Jussi protested loudly. I gently patted his head to calm him down, then turned to look at the clan head sitting in the armchair. You can't wrong someone without proof. Furthermore, according to the laws of the land, we can't use corporal punishment. If you truly believe Jussi stole the bracelet, you should report it to the authorities. If they find that Jussi is really a thief, then I have nothing more to say. The clan had sipped his tea, his face impassive. I couldn't tell if he was listening. Taking his silence as consent, I grabbed Jussi's hand and started to walk out of the hall. The Lin family's wife wasn't willing to let it go. "Stop them. If you don't leave the money, neither of you will get to leave." Several burly farm men surrounded us and forcefully pressed Jussi and me to our knees. The clan had finally put down his teacup, picked up a heavy wooden stick, and stood in front of Jussi with a disdainful look in his eyes. A village can't function with such filth. Today, I'll teach you a lesson on behalf of your mother. I should have known. They were all in on this, determined to bully our mother and son. No matter how many explanations I gave, it was useless. Just as the stick was about to strike Jussi, I lunged at them with the fury of a mother protecting her child, my whole body radiating strength. The situation spiraled out of control. A large group of armed officers poured into the courtyard, followed by Li Jin, who was dressed in official robes. The moment I saw him, my blood, which had been boiling, suddenly turned cold, and the determination I had just mustered quickly faded by half. The clan leader hurriedly invited him to sit at the high seat, pouring tea and water, his face wrinkling into a smile so wide it obscured his eyes. "No need for that. Just tell me what happened," Li Jin said with a serious expression. Lin Yu's wife, seeing the officials, staggered and kneeled, recounting the events with embellishments, crying and begging for justice from the high and mighty magistrate. Li Jin furrowed his brows tightly. The person standing next to him, sharp-eyed, ordered, "Silence. Speak only about the matter at hand, none of the unnecessary noise." Lin Yu's wife stopped howling and nodded tearfully. Li Jin stepped down, crouching in front of Meng Jussi, his voice soft. "Jussi, tell me what happened." Meng Jussi showed no fear, recounting the events in detail. "We were playing under the big banyan tree at the village entrance when Lin Ku's father came over and invited us to his house for some candy. I didn't want to go at first, but Sierra and the others dragged me along. I didn't go inside their house. I was just waiting outside. Then Lin Ku suddenly came out and started hitting me, accusing me of being a thief." Lin Yu's wife snorted derisively and smiled smugly as she reminded Li Jin, "Your Honor, this child is a bastard, born without a father, so you can't trust anything he says." Li Jin's expression instantly darkened, and he shot her a cold glare, his eyes filled with menace. Not only did Lin Yu's wife take a step back, but I too felt somewhat uneasy, my heart racing in my chest. Li Jin was angry. "Let's use the back room," Li Jin said to the clan leader. He then called in Lin Yu and Lin Kwa and finally Meng Jussi. Li Jin had been an official for many years and could easily tell if someone was lying. He had countless ways to pry the truth out of people. Less than a cup of tea later, the truth came to light. Lin Yu had been gambling in the city and had pawned a family heirloom bracelet, only to lose everything. Afraid of being blamed by his family, he had tried to frame Meng Jussi, thinking we, as orphans and widows, would be easy targets. After hearing this, the clan leader shot a fierce glare at the Lin family and quickly apologized to Li Jin with a fawning smile. "We were mistaken. Sorry to have troubled you, Your Excellency." It was really disgusting how the old man used his power to bully others, exploiting their vulnerability. I held Meng Jussi's hand as we walked out of the courtyard. Suddenly, I heard Li Jin's voice behind us. "Without evidence, detaining people, and using private punishment. If someone reports this to the authorities, you'll end up in the county jail for a few days." The clan leader was terrified and, in front of everyone, knelt down to apologize to me, almost slapping himself in the process. To be honest, it felt quite satisfying, but once I remembered that it was all thanks to Li Jin, my sense of discomfort returned. What made it worse was that Li Jin followed me back home. I opened the gate just enough to slip my hand through, calling out from a distance, "What do you want here?" Li Jin's gaze darkened, and after a long silence, he pulled out a small porcelain bottle from his sleeve. "Jussi is injured. This ointment will help him heal faster." I didn't want to take it, but after a moment's hesitation, I extended my hand. The moment my fingertips brushed against his palm, his fingers seemed to curl slightly, as if trying to hold onto something. I quickly retracted my hand, closed the gate, and called out loudly, "I know I still owe you 850 taels. I'll find a way to repay you. You can leave now. Don't let anyone misunderstand." The moonlight tonight was faint, but enough for me to see my fingertips reddened from the burn. I pressed against my chest, which was trembling from the rapid heartbeat, and couldn't help but self-mock. I really am useless. After the small summer heat passed, the sky seemed to always be drizzling. Though I had an umbrella, by the time I arrived at Xingxianglu, my skirt was still soaked halfway through. Himing took the umbrella from my hand, shook the water off, and set it aside on the table. Why not wait for the rain to stop before coming? I sipped the hot tea, my cold hands gradually warming up. This rain is bound to last all day. If we wait for it to stop, you might not be back until your next delivery. I can have someone bring it to you. I smiled faintly and shook my head. It was already a trouble for me to ask him to deliver things. How could I take advantage of him further? I picked up the sealed inkstone on the table, tapping my fingers lightly on its center, then letting go. In no time, the inkstone became a beautiful shade of blue-green, just as I wanted it. Himing, seeing my pleased expression, said with a lighter tone, "Looks like I didn't make the wrong choice." I nodded and took out the silver I had prepared in advance, adding a little extra for his hard work. Himing glanced at the silver, but left it lying there on the table. Instead, he raised his gaze and stared at me intently. "Miss Meng, have you thought about that matter?" My hand paused on the inkstone. Himing's situation was similar to mine, alone, raising a child, but he was a widower, his wife dying in childbirth. He had to run deliveries and care for his child, unable to manage both, and had started thinking about remarrying. But I had no intention of marrying again. Juicy was growing up, starting to understand things, and if I remarried now, it would surely make him uncomfortable. I pondered how to decline his offer, my peripheral vision catching a familiar figure. Li Jin, wearing a dark green robe, was slowly descending the stairs. As he did, his eyes never left me, and only after he disappeared did the sensation of being watched by a predator finally fade. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. Sure enough, I was sweating with anxiety. "Do you know the new county magistrate, Miss Meng?" Himing asked curiously. I casually lied. "No. I've thought it over. I'm sorry, but I have no intention of remarrying." Himing looked disappointed for a moment, then lifted his smile again. "It's all right. If you ever need something in the future, you can still come to me." I thanked him softly, picked up the umbrella, and hurriedly said my goodbyes. Judging by his attitude, he didn't seem to have given up, so I would need to keep my distance from him in the future. As I reached Xinxia Street, the rain suddenly intensified. Everything around me turned a dull gray. I found a sheltered corner, planning to wait for the rain to ease before continuing. Just as I approached, I saw a person standing under the eaves with an umbrella and a carriage parked nearby. I almost turned and walked away. Through the sound of the pouring rain, Li Jin's voice, cold yet tinged with a hint of anger, clearly reached my ears. Instinctively, I stopped in my tracks. Li Jin walked up to me, his expression icy. "Why did you run when you saw me?" I inwardly cursed myself. How useless I was. After all this time, when he called my full name, I was still too startled to move. "I didn't run," I murmured in protest. Li Jin sneered dismissively, his dark brown eyes scanning me up and down before deepening with more scrutiny. I followed his gaze, realizing that my thin outer garment had become soaked, clinging to my underclothes, revealing every curve. I awkwardly crossed my arms, trying to cover myself. Li Jin removed his outer coat and draped it over my shoulders, the warmth enveloping me. For a moment, I forgot to refuse. "Who is he?" It took me a while to process what he was asking. "Himing." "What does he do?" "He's a bodyguard." "What is your relationship with him? What were you doing with him just now? What did you say?" Li Jin's tone was sharp and commanding, making me feel like a criminal being interrogated by him. I retorted, "Why should I tell you? Even if I marry him, it's none of your business." Li Jin laughed in anger, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. A cold wind seemed to blow through, and I shivered uncontrollably. I pulled my coat tighter around me, glancing left and right, feigning frustration as I rubbed my forehead. Jiu-Si is still at home. I haven't returned for so long, he'll be worried. If you need to hide from the rain, you can stay under the eaves. When I said that, a part of me truly wanted to provoke him. These years living with Jiu-Si had been hard, and whenever things were difficult, I would think of him. If only he were here, everything would be better. But he wouldn't appear. Now, just as I had gotten used to not thinking about him, Li Jin shamelessly showed up, trying to control me, as if the suffering of all these years didn't matter at all. Why should it? Get in the carriage, I'll take you home. Li Jin grabbed my arm. I completely underestimated his shamelessness.
I don't need it.
It's been unsafe lately. A major criminal has escaped to Pingnan. It's too dangerous for you to be wandering alone. Don't you want to avoid worrying Jiu-Si? He smirked, as if he were sure I wouldn't be able to refuse. I gritted my teeth, forcefully shaking off his hand from my arm, and said with finality, "Thank you, but I don't need your help." In the end, I still got into Li Jin's carriage. He practically dragged me into it. Time had passed and things had changed. I never expected that I'd find myself in a moment of mutual silence with him. The rain seemed to lighten, the soft patter tapping against the carriage roof, quieter than before. Li Jin sat next to me, his body relaxed against the back of the seat, but his brow slightly furrowed, as though troubled by something. I felt just as frustrated. The carriage was cramped, and his crisp scent filled the space, invading my senses, pulling my thoughts further and further away. The third day after we had arranged our marriage, Li Jin had to return to the academy. In the carriage, my eyes were red as I tightly clutched his sleeve, unwilling to let go. Li Jin sighed softly, leaning down to kiss me. It was our first kiss, careful, tender, and lingering. My face flushed with heat, my hands and feet growing weak. Li Jin effortlessly pulled his sleeve out of my grasp, smiling as he said, "Chua, wait a little longer. In the future, I'll always be with you." The carriage turned a few corners and stopped gently. I didn't say goodbye to Li Jin. I nearly fled, lifting the curtain to leave, but he grabbed my arm. "Jiu-Si." "He's not your child," I interrupted, not even thinking before speaking. Since I had seen Li Jin again, I had imagined countless times how I would answer if he ever asked me that question. After all, I had never lied to him. The thought of deceiving him made me nervous. But when those words came out, I surprisingly felt an odd sense of calm and relief. "Sorry." Li Jin pressed his lips together, his voice low and apologetic. The hand gripping my arm unconsciously tightened, veins bulging slightly. I suddenly felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as though I had returned to the day when I sent him to the academy. Only this time, it was me who was leaving. I wouldn't kiss him, nor would I tell him, "We'll always be together." It must be said, Li Jin has the worst luck. A few hours earlier, after I had jumped out of the carriage, he came after me, reminding me to lock the doors and windows at night, to be careful of dangerous people breaking in. He even suggested that I and Jiu-Si move into his mansion. I naturally refused. So, Jiu-Si and I got kidnapped. If it weren't for the cold, murderous intent of the blade pressed against my neck, I'd almost believe this was some kind of play staged by Li Jin. The masked man raised the knife to Jiu-Si's chin and, holding a candlestick, studied him closely. This little mouse looks exactly like him. Hot wax dripped onto Jiu-Si's cheek. His eyelashes fluttered, but he bit his lip and endured it. This one's even more like him. The masked man twisted his wrist, bringing the blade to Jiu-Si's eyelid. Especially these eyes, staring at me makes my skin crawl. Li Jin hid you too well, but I still found you. He severed my father's head. I'll cut off his son's eyes as compensation. The blade slowly descended, glinting coldly. Jiu-Si's eyelid was slit, blood trickling into his eye. He continued to glare at the masked man, his calm demeanor beyond his years. I felt like a heavy stone had been lodged in my stomach, so scared I could barely breathe. There were two kidnappers, one holding a dagger, the other a black-faced man with a large blade, who was the bodyguard. After capturing Josie and me, they drugged us immediately. My mind was still clear, but my limbs felt useless. As I watched them threaten Josie, I was terrified, but I couldn't even scream. All of this was Li Jin's fault. If he hadn't stirred up trouble with these people, Josie and I wouldn't be in such danger. What's worse, my vision began to blur. I could barely see anything, only hearing the masked man's eerie voice. He told the black-faced man to get a box to put Josie's eyes and limbs in, intending to send them as a gift to Li Jin. Bastards. Dare to touch my Josie? I swear I'll kill them all. Wai Lin, let them go. I must be hearing things. I thought I heard Li Jin's voice. How could he be here? He should be in Yongling, married to the daughter of the Minister of War, with a successful career and children to inherit his legacy. When I opened my eyes, the familiar brownish-green bed curtains greeted me, and every breath I took was filled with the scent of the room. Awake. Li Jin stood up from the armchair and moved to sit by the bed, his eyes filled with concern. Do you feel unwell anywhere? I didn't feel well at all. My neck hurt, my head ached, and my whole body was sore. I almost wanted to throw myself into his arms and cry, like that time when my parents were building a dam and suffered an accident. I went to the overseer to demand an explanation, only to be humiliated. It was then that he rescued me, holding me in his arms and gently patting my back to comfort me. At that time, he had advised me not to do anything foolish and assured me he could handle everything, choking up as he said, "Chiwa, I only have you." But just a year later, he coldly handed me a divorce letter. I couldn't understand it. Just a few days ago, when the minister of the imperial court wanted to send someone to his residence, Li Jin had firmly rejected it, saying he didn't want me to be wronged. How could he suddenly not want me anymore? During my pregnancy, I had imagined many times that he would have a moment of realization and come to find me, to bring me back. But even after I gave birth to Josie, he never appeared. Now, he only shows up when it's too late. Li Jin called me twice again. Seeing that I wasn't responding, he hurriedly called for a doctor. I'm fine. I propped myself up and asked him, "Where's Josie?" Li Jin helped me lean back against the headboard, and seeing that I was truly fine, his expression softened a little. He's in the side room. He's fine. He woke up an hour earlier than you. Emochi is watching him. I breathed a sigh of relief, but still felt uneasy as I hadn't seen him yet. Despite Li Jin's urging me to rest, I went to the side room. Josie was very well behaved, sitting upright in an armchair with a book in his hands. His eyes blinked rapidly, and the scar above his eye hadn't affected him at all. He was completely absorbed in his book. I quietly withdrew. Li Jin followed me, and after a moment of silence, he spoke. Chiwa, there are some things I need to explain to you. I pressed my throbbing temple, my voice low. Let's talk another time. I had a vague idea of what he wanted to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. The pain and resentment of these past 5 years, I didn't want it to turn into a joke because of one of his words. While Li Jin was out, I took Meng Jisi and planned to sneak out of the mansion. Not long ago, he lied to me, saying that my house had collapsed while the authorities were chasing fugitives and suggested that Jisi and I stay at his place. However, just yesterday, when I asked Aunt Chin, I found out that my house was perfectly fine. Meng Jisi looked confused. Mother, are we leaving? We're going home, I corrected. Juicy lowered his head, a deep sense of disappointment enveloping him. Do you miss Lordly? I regretted asking immediately. If he nodded, I wouldn't know what to do. Although he didn't say anything, every time he looked at the children with their fathers holding their hands, I could see the envy in his eyes. Thankfully, Meng Jisi shook his head. I've only finished reading 4 of the books on the study's entire wall. Don't be upset, Jisi. I'll buy you more books in the future. More than the ones on that entire wall, and they'll be even better. Jisi finally nodded happily. Just as we reached the door, Li Jin's carriage happened to be parked outside. But he didn't notice us. Emochi was dragging Li Jin off the carriage, his body covered in blood, his face as pale as a sheet. The entire mansion was in chaos. Meng Jusi tugged at my hand and looked up, asking, "Mother, should we still leave?" I really wanted to leave, but just a moment ago, I had just talked to Jusi about staying. Li Jin had saved us many times. We couldn't keep troubling him or forget his kindness. When he needed us, we should help him as much as possible, so Jusi and I stayed. I don't know what Emochi was thinking, but he actually left the task of taking care of Li Jin to me. Doesn't he know there's a difference between men and women? I had planned to let him take care of it, but as soon as he sent the doctor out, he disappeared without a word. Li Jin was lying in bed, his breathing weak. The wound on his waist and abdomen had been bandaged by the doctor, but the surrounding bloodstains were only roughly wiped away. Other areas were covered in reddish-brown blood, and his clothes were in a miserable state. I sighed. Well, it's not like I haven't seen worse. After I finished cleaning Li Jin up, Emochi came in again, holding a bowl of medicine. "You feed him," I quickly ordered. But in the end, I was the one who carefully blew the medicine cool before feeding it to Li Jin, because there was something urgent at the government office, and Emochi left again. Li Jin woke up around the hour of the ugly, around 5 to 7 p.m. When he opened his eyes, he just lay there, not moving or speaking, but turned his head to stare at me, which gave me a fright. I touched his forehead. His temperature seemed normal. The doctor had said that the important parts weren't harmed, so as long as he didn't develop a fever, there shouldn't be much to worry about. I withdrew my hand and suggested, "You should hire more people. With injuries like yours, one person like Emochi can't handle it. I can't be around every time." I asked Anqing, "Our house can still accommodate people. Once you're well, I'll take Jusi and move back." Li Jin raised his hand to shield his eyes, taking several deep breaths, and finally managed to squeeze out a few words. "Chiua, do you really have to be like this? Avoiding me like a snake or scorpion?" I really wanted to say something to upset him, but seeing the pain in his expression and remembering his injuries, I softened my tone.
I'm a widow.
"Lord Li, you're a man of high status. Mixing with someone like me would ruin your reputation and career." "Meng Chiua, Meng Jusi is my child," Li Jin said, his voice rising in urgency. "What kind of widow are you?" I knew he was very clever. He could deduce when I got pregnant by Jusi's birth date, and given how much they looked alike, this secret was hardly a secret anymore. After a long silence, Li Jin softly apologized. "I'm sorry." Maybe he realized that his earlier words were a bit harsh. No one spoke, and the room fell into a deathly silence. Li Jin furrowed his brow and stared absent-mindedly at the bed curtain, as if he had lost all strength. What Emochi had said before echoed in my mind. 5 years ago, when Lord Li divorced you, it was a decision he had to make. The deaths of Li Jin's parents weren't an accident. They had discovered that the blue stone used in the construction of a dam had been replaced with the cheapest sandstones. When they reported this to the censoring official, they were murdered. These facts were revealed a year after their deaths, when Li Jin investigated. He was determined to seek revenge, but the corruption involved was widespread, and he was afraid he wouldn't be able to protect me, so he divorced me. Every time Lord Li was severely injured and unconscious, he would call out his wife's name. If it weren't for his memory of her, he probably wouldn't have made it this far. The first night he arrived in Pingnan, after learning that his wife had given birth to a son, he was both happy and troubled. He spent the whole night preparing, working non-stop. I still remembered my attitude when I reunited with him, disdain, avoidance, and not wanting to stay with him for even a second. I built an invisible wall between us, and he couldn't do anything to break it. Li Jin was the first to break the silence, his voice weary. "You've been tired for so long. Go rest." I raised my eyes and quietly watched him. After I found out about Jusi, my first reaction was joy. I thought with him, "You wouldn't abandon me." When I came back to find you, you were talking happily with the daughter of the Prime Minister's family. You even helped her tie her hair. I bit my lip and managed to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. I choked on my words as I continued. That day, I went to the medical clinic and bought an abortion pill. It went from cold to hot, hot to cold. By the time I boiled it down, I didn't dare to take it. When I first arrived in Pingnan, many people had designs on me. There were many who tried to climb in through my window at night. I chased them all away with a knife. Later, on the day I gave birth to Juicy, I used all my strength and almost fainted. I paused before continuing. At that time, I really thought I was going to die, but thinking about Juicy, he was born without a father or mother and would never survive, I held on. I had never raised a child before, so I raised him by mimicking everything you did. When should he go to school, what books to read, what things to use, all according to how you did it. Somehow, he became more and more like you. Especially his temperament. He's stubborn, never tells me when he's hurt. Lee Jean, these years, Juicy and I have suffered a lot. I should hate you. But some people are like the full moon in the sky. When you can't see them, their light fades with every passing night, but as soon as that light appears, even faintly, it makes you want to be bathed in it every night. Chiwa. Lee Jean struggled to sit up, pulling me into his arms tightly, as if afraid that once he found this treasure, it might slip away. I know. I will repay you both 1,000 times over for the rest of my life. Last night was the second time I saw Lee Jean shed tears. It really tugs at one's heartstrings, but when it comes to how to make Jiushi accept him, I'm not going to help him. After all, I had told Jiushi that his father died hunting on the mountain, killed by wolves, and that his body was never recovered. But I didn't expect that the next morning, while having breakfast, Jiushi suddenly called Lee Jean father. Lee Jean picked a shrimp from his bowl and placed it in mine, his eyes filled with an unmistakable pride and satisfaction. I suddenly found the shrimp in my mouth tasteless. Mother, I'm going to school, Jiushi said obediently, setting down his bowl and chopsticks. I followed suit, saying, I'll walk you there. But Lee Jean grabbed my sleeve, looking at me with a hurt expression. I'm injured. I can't go alone. If you're really worried, let Imochi take him. Since Jiushi turned 6, I had never taken him to school, but this time, I insisted on going. After all, I was curious about what Lee Jean had said to him. They had only talked for less than a quarter of an hour before Jiushi changed his tune. I hesitated, wondering how to approach the topic. Jiushi tilted his head, looking up at me. Mother, you want to ask what father said to me this morning, right? He's as clever as his father. I softened my tone. Can you tell me, Jiushi? Of course, he replied proudly. It turns out that the day at Lianlong Pavilion, Lee Jean had told Jiushi that he was his father. Jiushi had, of course, not believed it, but when he saw Lee Jin's face, which resembled his so much, he started to doubt himself. Until I appeared. Mother's expression when she looked at father was very complicated. I couldn't quite understand it, but it was still bright, just like when mother eats something delicious or earns a few extra coins. She's very happy. I reached up and touched my eyes. Was it that obvious? It wasn't obvious, but I understand, mother. I can tell. Jiushi smiled, pleased with himself. He's starting to look even more like Lee Jean. Why didn't you ask mother directly? After asking, I immediately regretted it. I knew better than anyone how mature Jiushi was. When he first questioned why he didn't have a father and saw how sad I looked while answering, he understood that mentioning his father would make me upset, so he never asked again. Before he could speak, I patted his head. Go on inside now. It's getting late. Make sure to listen attentively in class today. When you get back, father will check your homework. He's much stricter than mother. Yes, he answered with a bright smile. Seeing him so eager, I knew my decision from last night was the right one. The day before the autumn equinox, I planned to go to the temple to pray for Jiushi's safety. He had fallen seriously ill after his first month, and the medicine we gave him didn't seem to help. It wasn't until Chin Aunt suggested that we pray at the temple that things miraculously got better after just one visit. Since then, every year on his birthday, I would go to the temple a day early to ask for a talisman. What puzzled me, though, was that Li Jin came along. His gestures while praying were even more proper than mine. I couldn't help but ask, "When did you start believing in these things?" Li Jin slowed his movements, taking my hand in his. "Since you left. I couldn't send someone to watch over you, and I couldn't rest easy. So I started praying, hoping that the Buddha could protect you." I tightly grasped his hand in return. "You don't need to pray anymore." Li Jin stared deeply at me, then gently fixed the stray hairs on my forehead. With a soft smile, he said, "No, I don't need to anymore." Looking into his tender eyes, I suddenly recalled something. I pulled my hand away, feeling a bit sour. "You smiled like that the other day, when you were with the daughter of the Minister of Rights." Li Jin froze for a moment. After a long pause, he turned my shoulder to face him, explaining, "She and I have always been allies. There was nothing else. The scene you saw was just an act to make you leave quickly. By that time, I had already taken action, and there were many people watching me secretly." I shot him a resentful look. Li Jin grabbed my hand and slapped it against his chest. "If you're still angry, just hit me and vent your frustration." I quickly withdrew my hand. His injury had only just healed, and I didn't want to make it worse. Taking care of him was exhausting enough. "Chiua, you really do care about me," Li Jin said, a smile slowly forming on his lips as he held my hand and kissed it lightly. First the back of my hand, then my cheek, making me feel like I was about to melt. And this was all happening outside, with so many people watching. Li Jin kept his eyes on me, his shy wife hurriedly jumping into the carriage, and he chuckled softly. Now, he somewhat regretted not kissing her the first time they met. In the end, he came to fulfill a vow. Now, he had finally obtained the happiness he sought. The weary bird returns to its nest, having its wish granted.